Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about my 15 favorite books of 2015. Before we get started, just a couple of disclaimers. First off, these are not necessarily books that were all published in 2015, just books that I read this year. Second is that because I have 15 books, I don't want this video to end up being like a half an hour long. So if I have reviews of those books available, I have links to all of those down in the description so you guys can check out those for more information on those books. I'll go into more detail on the books that don't have reviews, but if they do have a review, I'll probably speak very quickly about them. And finally, I haven't ranked these books necessarily. There is one book that is like my all-time favorite of the year, and you will know what that is when I get to it because I will say that. But otherwise, these are all just books that I really enjoyed and would highly recommend to people. So I'm basically just going through this list in the order that I read them in 2015 because it was just too much work to rank them. So the first book that I have is Deep Down Dark by Hector Tobar. This is a nonfiction book that talks about the Chilean mine collapse that happened in 2010, where 33 Chilean miners were trapped in a mine. This book was so good. It was such a great way to start off the new year. This wasn't the first book that I read, but it was pretty early on in the year, within the first month, and it was so gripping. If you're someone who thinks they don't like nonfiction books, this is one worth picking up and trying because the story is so strong and so gripping. I knew what was going to happen to these miners. Like, I knew whether or not they survived, and I remember this news story, but even with all of that information, this story is still so gripping. Hector Tobar does a really good job of researching these miners and their families and talking about the situations that they were faced to deal with and the things that Chile was faced to deal with during this situation, and how like the whole world was just watching and waiting to see what was going to happen to these men. It's such an amazing story, and I believe it's being made into a movie. I don't know if the movie's been released yet, but I remember that they were adapting this into a movie, and the story is just fantastic. So before the movie comes out, check out the book. Next up, I have State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. Ann Patchett is someone who I really enjoy her writing, but I hadn't really read a lot of her novels, which I was surprised at myself at. So when I saw this edition in stores, I knew I had to pick it up. This story follows Dr. Singh, who ends up going down into the Amazon to try to find her mentor, Dr. Swenson, who is doing all of this medical research, and Dr. Swenson ends up going like missing, or she isn't like communicating with the university back in the United States. So Dr. Singh heads down to the Amazon to try to find her and to figure out what's going on, and I believe she's supposed to give her some bad news, but you know, no spoilers or anything. The reason why I love Ann Patchett's stories is because when you hear that synopsis, you think that this is going to be some sort of like high concept novel or something like that, but all of Ann Patchett's work seems to really just be character studies set in these very specific situations. Ann Patchett does such a great job of just fleshing out these real and complex characters and storylines that deal with these morally gray areas, and you're not completely on board with what these characters are doing, but you're so moved by them as people that you end up kind of taking their side on things that you might not necessarily take their side on otherwise. It's just such a strong book, and this totally gripped me. I loved it so much, and I highly recommend it. And if you haven't read any Ann Patchett, this is definitely a good place to start. Next up, I have The Unquiet Dead by Asma Zehana Khan. This is a mystery book that totally took me by surprise. I believe this is her debut novel. I do have a review of this one, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this is a really great, really gripping mystery novel. This takes place in Canada, but it talks a lot about a lot of different wars and massacres that happened in Europe, which I thought was really great because it covered a lot of stuff that I don't think is talked about very much in literature. Next up, I have Anonymity by Eula Biss, and I also have a review of this one up on my channel. This is a nonfiction book that talks about vaccinations, but Eula Biss does a really great job of talking about vaccinations in a very personable way. Eula Biss is a mother herself, and so she approaches vaccinations from the point of view of a mother and wants to know why people are so scared of getting vaccinations, what's the point of them, how they came into being, and she also just layers in a lot of really interesting information about the history of vaccinations. She does it all, I think, without giving any sort of bias or judgment onto people. Next up, I have Citizen by Claudia Rankine. Still not sure how to say her name. This is considered a collection of poetry, but I feel like it's more like a piece of modern art. I don't have the book with me to hold up, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of really great things to see visually in this book, but I do have a review of it so you guys can check that out. Next up I have The Martian by Andy Weir, and I feel like I don't really need to say a lot about this one even though I don't have a review of it on my channel. I don't even have my copy of it because I've lent it out to my sister. This is a book that everyone either is requesting to read for me or it's a book that I've been pushing onto people because I know that this is just such a fun book. Next up I have Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. This is a memoir that talks about Caitlin Doughty's working in a crematory. This book is super fascinating and super honest about the ways that people deal with death, specifically Americans, deal with death or choose not to deal with death, and how when they're forced to confront those things, the ways that different people react to those situations. This book is another really short one, really great nonfiction book. Again, if you're someone who doesn't like nonfiction normally, this is one worth picking up and I think would change your mind on nonfiction because the story itself is so gripping and Caitlin Doughty does such a great job of explaining not only her work but about the people that she's had to deal with and the different situations that she's been forced into. Next up I have Signal to Noise by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is my favorite book of the year. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars and it's the only book I've given 5 stars to this year. I loved it so much. I have a full review of this, which is basically just 5 minutes of me completely fawning over this book. It gave me so many feelings. It takes place in the 1980s in Mexico. It's following these teenagers who are so unlikable on the surface, but you care so much about them. Oh, I can't rave about this book enough. I could spend this rest of this video talking about this, but instead I will point you to my review and hope that you guys end up picking up this book because this is definitely a book that not a lot of people are reading and picking up because it is from a smaller press, and I feel like this is a book you shouldn't miss out on. Next I have Cinnamon and Gunpowder by Eli Brown. I have a review of this one as well, but this is both a pirate adventure book but also a food book. So if you like either food books or pirate adventures or both or neither, I feel like this is still worth picking up. This book is just a lot of fun. You are following this chef who ends up getting kidnapped by this pirate named Mad Hannah Mabbitt, and they form this sort of unlikely friendship. Basically the chef is forced to feed Hannah this exquisite meal once a week even though they're like on a ship in the middle of the ocean. So you get to read about the different ways that he invents these amazing dishes with the limited resources that he's provided. So I feel like this really appeals to the foodie part of me, but it also just has really great characters and is a lot of fun, and I totally enjoyed this. Such a great book. Next up I have The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Shafak. I also have a review of this one, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it takes place in Turkey during the height of the Ottoman Empire, and I feel like this cover alone should just make people want to pick it up because it's kind of the most beautiful thing in the world. But this is just such a really great, really magical without there actually being magic book. Next up I have Girl at War by Sarah Novick. This story was so moving and I didn't realize originally what exactly this book would be covering, but with recent events I feel like even more and more I've been recommending this book for people. The first part of the story takes place in the early 1990s in Croatia, and you are following this young girl named Anna as she is basically in Croatia as there is this massive war breaking out between the Croatians and the Serbians, I believe, and basically her and her sister are forced to become refugees in the United States. So with just recent events of, you know, Syrian refugees traveling to all of these different countries, I feel like this is a great perspective on what it's like for someone to be a refugee, the conflict that they'll feel as they're forced to leave their home, put into a country with a lot of privileges, as while they know that there are still people back home who are suffering and don't have the things that they have access to. It's such a great book. I was so blown away by it. I picked it up kind of on a whim and I was so surprised by how much I loved it. Next up I have Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. This is a book that talks about vulnerability, and the subtitle is How the Courage to Be Vulnerable Transforms the Way That We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. If you're someone who normally doesn't read a lot of self-help books, this one might take a little bit of time to adjust to, but I feel like it's still really accessible and it doesn't seem too self-helpy. Brene Brown has a lot of experience and has done a lot of research on the topic of vulnerability, and so this is basically her book talking about that. She also has a lot of really great TED Talks, so I definitely recommend watching those maybe if you want to get a sense of her writing style and a sense of some of the topics that she touches on. But this is just a really great, really honest look at the idea of vulnerability and why we all avoid it and why we should be really embracing it. Next up, I have Smaller and Smaller Circles by F.H. Batacan, which I have a review of, so you guys can check that out. But this book won the National Philippine Book Award, and there is definitely a reason why. It is a thriller novel that follows two Jesuit priests as they try to solve a murder or catch a murderer. Really, I don't know why you would need more information than that in a pitch, but this is definitely a book worth picking up. It's so great. My second to last book for this video is Winter by Marissa Meyer. This is the final book in the Lunar Chronicle series, and I have a review of this as well as the entire Lunar Chronicle series up on my channel. This was just such a fantastic ending. There are parts of this that felt a little bit forced or a little bit contrived in order to get the correct ending, and everything does end relatively neat and tidy, but I feel like this was such a great ending to such a great series that it'd be wrong of me not to have it on the list. I had so much fun reading this book and I really enjoyed it, and I love these characters so much. And the final book that I have is Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Man, I am so late to this bandwagon, but I'm so glad that I finally gotten started on this. This is her first novel and it is such a strong debut. I'm just like completely in awe of this book. I have a full review of this on my channel, so I will link to that so you guys can see me completely raving about the story. It isn't a perfect story. There are parts of it that bothered me a little bit, but still the characters in here are so strong and so complex, and I loved it so much, and I'm so excited to read more of her work. So yeah, those are my favorite 15 books of 2015. If you've read any of these books, feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know which ones you guys enjoyed, or let me know what your favorite read was of this year. I know sometimes it can be kind of hard to pick one, but I'm sure a lot of you guys have that #1 favorite of the year. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.